Hi, this is Chris with firstcenturychristianity.net. Today, I'm reviewing the book, The Return of the Gods by Jonathan Cahn, by asking a question: are the false gods real? Because the Bible seems to say both things. So Jonathan Cahn's book is a wonderful application of our common knowledge of the pagan things in mainstream Christianity and in the world today. Many of us came into this faith because we realized that Sunday isn't the Sabbath. And then we go, well, why is everybody worshiping on Sunday, Deus Solis in Latin, which is the day of the invincible sun, which is a day to honor a sun god? Why is everybody doing that? Well, because that came into Christianity by the merging of pagan practices into the faith once delivered to the saints. We also realized and learned that the tenets of mainstream Christianity of Christmas and Easter are also pagan holidays that have been Christianized, so to speak. So Cahn takes this knowledge that those of us in the faith once delivered share about Baal and Molech and Ishtar, and he brings it right into modern times. He ties it into the end times. He ties it into what's happening in our world today. So this is a wonderful exercise for those of us who have left traditional Christianity in order to follow in the footsteps of the first century believers. This is a really good example of why we're on the right path, why we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. He also gives a good history lesson that these gods or goddesses were worshipped across thousands of years under different names. So when you see Diana of the Ephesians in the book of Acts, you understand that that's actually Artemis, that's actually Ishtar, that's the same goddess, and these same practices and worship things keep showing up over thousands of years. They just come up in different names. Cahn traces the modern day debauchery of sexual sin in the Western world directly to the return of these gods. He does so in a remarkably convincing fashion. He shows the largest success of Christianity when Christianity got a foothold. There after the first century, it was pretty rough. Second, third century, Christianity starts to get pretty popular, and then Rome adopts it. It has a huge positive, two huge positives. One is it gets rid of the false gods and all the idolatry. And two is that it adopts biblical family values and biblical morality for most of the world, if not all of the world. Even places that didn't adopt Christianity did ultimately give up the temple prostitution and the idolatry in large measure. So this is a wonderful thing that Christianity did. Now we see these abominable sexual practices coming back, and Jonathan Cahn is tying that to the return of the gods, where these abominable practices were used to worship them as part of because your behavior dictates who you worship. And so if you follow Yahweh, you're going to follow the 10 commandments. You're going to follow the Torah. You're going to walk like his son. You're going to live the way that the first century believers lived. If you don't follow Yahweh, you might live however you imagine, or you might end up following these false gods and goddesses. You can see these practices. Romans 1 is the New Testament reference for tying idolatry to the abominable sexual practices. But you can also see it throughout the Old Testament when Israel went astray, which was more often than not. So those who might wonder about these huge slaughters that Israel was commanded to do in the land of Canaan, it was because of these practices. The land of Canaan worshiped these false gods and goddesses, and they did horrible things to worship them. The false gods and goddesses don't appear to like life that much. They want you to procreate without making babies. And if you make babies, they want you to get rid of them by burning them in furnaces to a god named Molech. So when Yahweh told the Israelites to destroy absolutely everything in the land of Canaan, It was to purge that land of the incredible sins that they had piled up over the previous 100 years while Israel grew up as a nation in Egypt. So the Exodus was twofold. It was to bring up 70 people go in and 2 million come out to establish the chosen people. But the second reason for the Exodus is to bring that army into Canaan to eradicate these pagan, awful practices. And the reason I bring that up is because that's what's going to happen at the end of days, when at the last trump, when everything is rolled up and all the works of the earth are burned up. It's because of these practices. And so we should be very aware of them so that we don't partake. A big disappointment with Jonathan Cahn in this book is that he doesn't actually finish the job. He doesn't tell his readers that Christmas, Sunday, and Easter are also practices of these false gods and goddesses. It's a shame because he clearly knows the information, but he doesn't make the connection so that you can take the proper action to disassociate yourself from these false gods completely. Easter is 100% the worship of a fertility goddess, a pagan fertility goddess, and the celebration of the resurrection of a false god named Tammuz. That the day of Easter has nothing to do with Yeshua the Messiah, Jesus the Christ, whatsoever. It's timed out on the equinox. It's timed out on the wrong calendar. And it's timed out to be a pagan celebration. And you can even see the practices of bunnies laying eggs and all of these things as being fertility practices to this day. You can just plainly see what that is. Christmas, with its worship of evergreen trees and its timing at the winter solstice, is also a fertility celebration. If you look into the 12 days of Christmas, the Yule log and the mistletoe, you will find that these practices are originated and tied to abominable sexual immorality of the Saturnalia, which was a Roman pagan celebration at the exact same time of the year, with giving of gifts and all this same nonsense. Sunday is all the day of the sun, the day of the invincible sun, which I already mentioned. And these 3 days are used to worship gods that are not Yahweh. Yahweh has days. Is the Shabbat, the seventh-day Sabbath, is his day of the week. And then he's got annual holidays that are in Leviticus 23. So the lesson for all of us to learn here is that mankind is being, from Romans 1, mankind is being punished but with these abominable sexual practices because of idolatry. And Sunday, Christmas, and Easter are idolatrous practices from pagan religions. So if we really want to finish the deal here, if we really want to fix this, we have to go all the way and fix it. But now on today's question, the one I posed at the assembly on Shabbat is, are the false gods real? Now, the next slide has a bunch of verses showing yea and nay, right? You have the first two commandments, which says Yahweh says he's our Elohim, he's our God, and we aren't to worship any other gods. And you can see that Paul in Ephesus tells them that gods made with hands are no gods at all. But then you could see Elijah staring down the prophets of Baal on top of the mountain. And then you can see John saying in 1 John, don't believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out in the world. And you know the Spirit of God that confesses Yeshua is the Messiah has come in the flesh. So you can see without too much effort that both things are true in the Bible. The Bible says the false gods aren't real. And then the Bible says they are real and they have some power. So how do we reconcile the two? Well, the way I do it is that the trinket itself has no power. The statue, the image of the false god is just something a person made. But the fact that all those people made the same exact things without even knowing each other over thousands of years shows that there is some supernatural power going on there. When the Spanish conquistadors got to South America and they found them worshiping a mother and a child, just like they did in their Catholic churches, because those Catholic churches adopted that from Tammuz and Semiramis and Nimrod. But you can see that these things don't just show up on accident. When the witch in Endor brought up Samuel, it worked. So the way I come to this is that Yahweh is not commanding us to not do something that we can't do. There's no commandment for us to not jump off of a cliff and try to fly. He doesn't say, thou shalt not try to fly like a bird, because we can't fly like a bird. So when he says don't have false gods in front of them, whether the trinket isn't real or whether the trinket represents something real, it's something you can do. When he says don't go after false spirits, don't go after witchcraft, don't try to talk to the dead, it appears that that's because those things are possible, and you're opening yourself up to evil spirits coming into your life. So reconciling how the Bible says both things, is pretty easy to do. But the moral of the story here, you should read the book. It's a good book. If you've never gotten into the pagan stuff of mainstream Christianity or paganism, this Jonathan Cahn does a very good job of explaining it at a basic level of who these false gods were and what their worship practices were and how that's tied to what's happening today with a resurgence. And his point is that these gods have been gone for so long and they want to come back and get their just comeuppance, which does make sense as the world turns back into what it was in Genesis 6 before the return of the Messiah. Please educate yourself about these topics, about the paganism, about the abominable practices, and understand that we don't just push biblical morality because it's biblical morality. But we don't just push it because it makes sense and because it works. We push it because mankind and society have a vested interest in staying on the right side of history, because at some point, Jesus the Christ, Yeshua the Messiah, is going to come back. And he's going to come back, and he's wondering if he's going to find us doing his Father's will when he does. We need to be found on the right side of history when the Messiah comes back. We should take care to avoid any practices that might open ourselves up to these false gods and these powers. So I hope you have a wonderful week, and may Yahweh bless you and keep you in the name of his son, Yeshua.